I never thought I'd be the one to destroy my family. But as I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached, I knew there was no coming back from this. My father's car was parked across the street, in front of a house I'd never seen before. At first, I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe someone had the same model. Maybe this was all some weird misunderstanding. But then the front door opened, and my father stepped outside. He wasn't alone. A blonde woman followed him, laughing softly as she adjusted the collar of his coat. Then two kids, his kids, ran out after him, calling out, "Daddy." I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. No. No way. This wasn't real. I was dreaming. Or having a breakdown. Something. But the way my father scooped up the little girl, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, the way the boy grabbed his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, none of that was fake. My stomach twisted. I felt like I was going to be sick. My father had a whole other family. For a few seconds, I just sat there, frozen. I could have driven away. Pretended I never saw anything. Kept living in blissful ignorance. But something inside me snapped. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was out of the car, crossing the street. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Dad?" He turned, and for the first time in my life, I saw something I had never seen on my father's face. Panic. His entire body tensed. His eyes darted between me and the woman beside him. "Who's this?" she asked, glancing at me in confusion. My father hesitated. Then he lied. "He's no one." The words punched the air right out of my lungs. No one. No one. I barely registered my own voice. Are you serious?" My father swallowed hard. "Not here," he muttered under his breath. He stepped forward, grabbing my arm. "Get in the car." I yanked away from him. "No. What the hell is this? Who are they? Who are you?" His face twisted. "Get in the car. Now." The woman frowned. "Mark, what's going on?" "Mark. Not Dad." I let out a hollow laugh. "Oh, you don't know either, huh? Let me help you out. This guy? He's my father. My actual father. You know, the one with a whole other family." The woman paled. "What?" My father grabbed my arm again, harder this time. His voice dropped to a near growl. "Get in the damn car." I could have fought him. Could have kept shouting, let the entire neighborhood know exactly what kind of man he was. But I needed answers. So, against every screaming instinct in my body, I let him drag me toward his car. The entire drive home, I stared out the window, my thoughts racing. My father said nothing. His grip on the steering wheel was so tight I swore I could hear the leather creaking under his fingers. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "You can't tell your mother." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "That's what you're worried about?" His jaw clenched. "It would destroy her." "You destroyed her," I snapped. "You did this." "Not me." Silence. He exhaled through his nose. "If you tell her, you're out." I turned to him, my chest tightening. "What?" He didn't look at me. "If you tell her, you're out of this house. Out of my life." I stared at him, my mouth dry. "Are you serious?" He didn't respond. I should have been shocked. I should have been devastated. But all I felt was cold, creeping anger. I looked back out the window. "Good," I said quietly. He flinched. I didn't care. When we pulled into the driveway, my father killed the engine and sat there, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. The air between us felt like a pressure cooker, thick, suffocating, ready to explode. For a second, I thought he was going to try one last time to convince me to stay quiet. But he just sat there, breathing hard through his nose, staring straight ahead like if he didn't look at me. None of this was happening. I didn't wait for him to speak. I shoved the door open and got out. My legs felt shaky as I walked up the front steps. My stomach churned. I had no idea how I was going to say this to my mom. I didn't even want to say it. But I wasn't the one who did this. I wasn't the liar. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, except for the faint sound of the TV coming from the living room. My mom was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching some mindless reality show. She looked peaceful, normal, completely unaware that her whole life was about to come crashing down. She turned when she saw me. "Hey, sweetie. You're home late." Her voice was soft, warm, familiar. It made me feel sick. I swallowed hard. "Mom, we need to talk." Her forehead creased. She sat up straighter, lowering the volume on the TV. "What is it?" Behind me, my father stepped inside. "Nothing," he said quickly. "Everything's fine." I whipped around, rage flaring in my chest. "Are you serious right now?" Mom's frown deepened. She looked between us. Mark. My father's jaw tightened. It's nothing, Lisa. I turned back to her, my hands shaking. Mom, he's lying to you. Her lips parted slightly. What do you mean? I inhaled sharply. My pulse pounded in my ears. I found him tonight, I said. At a house I've never seen before. With a woman. And 2 kids. My throat tightened. They called him Dad. For a second, she didn't react. She just stared at me. Then she let out a soft, breathy laugh. That's not funny. I didn't say anything. Her eyes flicked to my father. Mark. He was silent. The color drained from her face. Her voice cracked. Tell me it's not true. My father exhaled through his nose. He ran a hand over his mouth, then muttered, Lisa, I can explain. She flinched like he had hit her. Oh my God, she whispered. She stumbled back, gripping the edge of the couch like she needed something to hold on to. I reached for her, but she shook her head. How long? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Silence. How long, Mark? His shoulders sagged. 7 years. She let out a choked laugh, covering her mouth with her hand. 7 years, she repeated, almost to herself. You've been lying to me for 7 years. Dad took a step toward her. Lisa, please. Don't. The word was sharp. Final. She lifted her chin, blinking rapidly like she was trying to hold herself together. Get out. Dad's face hardened. Lisa. Get out of my house, she screamed, her voice breaking. I can't even look at you right now. Get out. For a second, I thought he was going to argue. But then he looked at me. And I made sure he saw it. Every ounce of the anger, the betrayal, the disgust. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him. Mom let out a shaky breath and sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I sat down next to her. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us cried. We just sat there. Because what was there left to say? The house felt different without him. Not in a dramatic, everything has changed kind of way. It wasn't like the walls crumbled or the furniture suddenly lost its meaning. It was subtler than that. The silence was heavier. The air, thicker. Like the house itself was waiting for something to happen. Mom barely moved from the couch. She just sat there, staring at nothing, her hands clenched together in her lap. She looked like she wanted to cry but couldn't. I didn't know what to do. So I got up and made tea. It was stupid, really. Tea wasn't going to fix anything. It wasn't going to erase the past 7 years of lies. But I needed to do something. The kettle whistled. I poured 2 cups, set them on the coffee table, and sat back down next to her. She blinked like she had forgotten I was there. Then she exhaled sharply, reaching for the tea with slightly trembling hands. Thanks, she murmured. I nodded. We sat there, the steam curling between us, the weight of everything pressing down on our shoulders. Then, finally, she spoke. I feel like an idiot. I turned to her, startled. She let out a humorless laugh, staring down at the cup in her hands. I should have known. 7 years. Her voice wavered. There were signs. I just didn't want to see them. I frowned. What signs? She swallowed hard. The late nights. The sudden work trips. The way he stopped really looking at me. She exhaled, shaking her head. God, I thought I knew him. I thought we were happy. My chest tightened. Mom, this isn't your fault. She let out a bitter laugh. Isn't it? I sat up straighter. No, absolutely not. He made this choice. He lied. He betrayed you. This is on him. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, like she wanted to believe me but wasn't quite there yet. I took a sip of my tea, then hesitated before asking, What are you going to do? She didn't even pause. I'm divorcing him. The words were steady, unshaken. For the first time since this nightmare started, she sounded like herself. I nodded. Good. She let out a slow breath. I need to think. I need to figure out what happens next. I hesitated. Do you want me to stay home from work tomorrow? Help you with stuff? She shook her head. No, sweetheart. You don't need to put your life on hold for this. Are you sure? She reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm sure. I squeezed back. The worst part of all of this wasn't the betrayal. It was the fact that he got to choose this. He got to walk out that door and start fresh, like none of this mattered, like we were just some phase of his life he had outgrown. But we didn't get to move on so easily. We were left in the wreckage. And now, we had to find a way to rebuild. The next few days passed in a haze. Mom functioned on autopilot. She went to work, came home, and barely spoke unless I spoke first. She was going through the motions, but I could tell. She wasn't here. Not really. And I didn't know how to bring her back. I wasn't doing much better. I went to work, hung out with friends when they asked, pretended everything was fine. But every time I was alone, my mind dragged me right back to that night. The look on my dad's face when I caught him. The way he called me no one. And then there was Mom, sitting in the kitchen late at night, staring at the divorce paperwork like it physically hurt her to read it. I wanted to do something. Fix something. But how do you fix a life that was built on a lie? Then, one evening, I walked into the kitchen and found Mom hunched over a pile of documents, her face paler than usual. I frowned. You okay? She didn't answer right away, just slid a folder across the table toward me. Look at this. I hesitated before picking it up. Inside were old bank statements, credit card bills, financial records dating back years. I flipped through them, confused. What am I looking at? Mom exhaled sharply. He's been stealing from us. I froze. What? She pointed at a section she had highlighted. For the past 5 years, he's been transferring money into another account. Her fingers curled into a fist. I finally figured out whose. My stomach twisted. Hers. She nodded, her jaw tight. He's been paying for her mortgage, her car, their kids' school tuition. With our money. I gripped the edge of the table, my pulse hammering. How much? Her eyes darkened. Over 70 grand. I felt sick. He hadn't just betrayed us emotionally, he had robbed us. I clenched my fists. What do we do? Mom sat back, crossing her arms. My lawyer says we can take legal action. We can prove financial misconduct, and that'll screw him over in the divorce settlement. I'll get back what's mine. For the first time in weeks, she sounded like herself again. I let out a slow breath. Good. She nodded, then looked down at her hands. I don't think I ever really knew him. I swallowed hard. Neither did I. The divorce dragged on for months. At first, Dad fought it, tried to play the victim, claimed he never meant to hurt anyone. But when Mom's lawyer hit him with the financial records, the stolen money, the receipts of his betrayal, he folded like a cheap suit. In the end, Mom got most of what she wanted. The house, the assets, the money he had siphoned away. And Dad, he got exactly what he deserved. Nothing. I didn't see him once during the whole process. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd try. That he'd show up, try to talk to me, try to fix something. He never did. The man who raised me, the man who used to take me to baseball games, who taught me how to drive, who sat next to me in the hospital when I broke my arm, was gone. And apparently, he didn't care enough to come back. Then, a month after the divorce was finalized, I got a text. Mark, can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. For a second, just a second, I almost responded. Almost asked why now. Almost gave him the chance to explain himself. Then I remembered. The house. The other family. The way he looked me in the eye and called me no one. I typed out a response. Me, no. I hit send. Then I blocked his number. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt free.